Are Resident Evil games becoming less scary? I mean, when it comes to subjective opinions, this is about as subjective as it gets. What one person finds scary might not be what another person finds scary. I'll give you an example from my own life. I hate needles, can't stand them. Yet I can watch a movie like Romero's Dawn of the Dead, one of the best movies ever made, by the way, and watch blood and guts get thrown around for 2 hours, and I'll think to myself, this is awesome. However, some people, maybe not today, but back when the movie came out, might have been really scared of that movie. So when I come out here claiming that Resident Evil games are not as scary as they used to be, that doesn't really mean anything, because many people probably do find these games to be scary. That being said, I do believe that there is a crucial element missing from newer Resident Evil games that was present in the older games. That crucial element is tension. Now, tension is not something that is exclusive to the horror genre. You can have tension and tense moments in any genre. But what's important about having tension in Resident Evil games is that tension-filled gameplay is what brought a lot of people into the franchise in the first place, myself included. So when the tension is taken away or significantly downplayed, then yes, I'm going to notice, and yes, it's going to bother me. So in order to understand what exactly has changed in modern Resident Evil games, we need to understand how older Resident Evil games built tension. And what better place to start than with what many people call the best Resident Evil game ever made, the GameCube RE1 remake. RE1 is not an action romp like RE4. It's not a boss gauntlet like RE8. It is slow, atmospheric, and filled with tension. Ammunition is scarce, so shooting down zombies is not exactly the ideal solution if you want to progress. Not to mention the fact that fallen zombies will rise back up stronger and faster than before if you don't burn the bodies. This makes it much more effective to dodge and outrun zombies. Some people may think that sounds boring, but I would say that this adds a whole new dimension to the gameplay. Coming across a zombie with his back turned is an opportunity for the player to slip by unnoticed and save those extra bullets. However, you also run the risk of the zombie grabbing you, often from behind, which you can't use a defensive item to defend against. Speaking of defensive items, these act as a sort of free pass to get past a zombie. However, these are also items you want to try and save for when you really need them. Emphasizing movement and dodging over all-out combat means that every encounter is a tense encounter, because there's a ton of risk-reward thinking that goes into it regardless of how you choose to deal with the zombie. Then there's the ink ribbon system, which is something that I can see a lot of people not liking about these games, and I understand why, but at the same time it does add another level of tension when death can carry such a heavy price, like losing a lot of progress. Modern Resident Evil games will usually have some sort of this system, like the RE4 remake on Professional will disable autosave, and the RE2 remake on Hardcore actually has the exact same ink ribbon system as the older games. And we are going to discuss these games later on, but first I want to hammer home this point that it is not just one game mechanic that creates the tension. It is multiple game mechanics that build on one another to create gameplay that is always tense. And before we move on, I'd like to address the jump scares, because jump scares is something that has pretty much become synonymous with Resident Evil. Many people think of jump scares as just a cheap way to scare people. They're not actually scary, rather they're just startling, and in most cases I would agree with that. But in the case of RE1, I think the jump scares are extremely effective because the game is very tense all the time. If the tension wasn't there, then the jump scare would feel cheap, which is something you'll notice with some modern Resident Evil games. Now that we've established how classic Resident Evil builds tension, let's talk about the modern era of Resident Evil games, starting with RE7. Now I actually don't have gameplay footage to show for RE7 because I don't own the game on my PC and I don't have any desire to replay the game, but that's not really important for this discussion, so I'm going to keep things pretty brief for RE7. This game was basically responsible for kickstarting the modern Resident Evil era as we know it today, and to this day, I believe it is the single scariest Resident Evil game to ever come out. A huge reason for this is the fact that it is very reminiscent of the old school Resident Evil design, with that slow, creeping tension being an integral part of the experience. However, ever since Resident Evil 7, it seems like the games have been getting less and less scary with each subsequent release, with the exception being Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I believe follows the same principles of building tension, which is no surprise considering it is a remake of one of the classic games. So let's take a look at how RE2 builds tension. Just like in RE1, it's not one thing that makes the game tense. Rather, it is a combination of things. The same ideas of avoiding combat and conserving ammunition are here, of course, but what I think RE2 does better than any other Resident Evil game is how it eases you into the game. You start off dealing with zombies, which are dangerous in large numbers or enclosed areas, but relatively easy to deal with as long as you have some space to move around. Then you get introduced to lickers, which are more dangerous than zombies and force you to move slowly in order to maneuver past them. Then you leave the police station for a bit only to come back and encounter Tyrant, who will force you to run away or force you down a path you would have otherwise avoided. In this way, I think RE2 is actually superior to RE1. Let me explain. A lot of the tension in RE1 comes from the fact that you don't know what's coming next, meaning that once you've beaten the game, you don't get that same level of tension on repeat playthroughs. Whereas with RE2, no matter how many times I've played the game, I still find myself in these extremely tense situations because of how the enemies are designed. Yes, a licker is dangerous on its own, but it's even more dangerous when I know Tyrant could burst through the door at any moment. And again, it's not like the game throws everything at you all at once. You don't just walk into the police station and waiting for you there is Tyrant, a licker, and a group of zombies. I mean, that'd be like if they made an RE3 remake and without any build-up at all, just had Nemesis burst through the wall to attack Jill at the start of the game and... oh, that's what they did. By now, you might be starting to see the problem that a lack of tension poses for these games. If there's no build-up, no time taken to establish what exactly we're supposed to be scared of, then those big moments when the monster appears do not feel earned. RE3 Remake's initial Nemesis encounter is the perfect example of this. I mean, let's just compare this to how the original RE3 handled the first Nemesis encounter. You start out on the streets of Raccoon City, dealing with only zombies. Then you find Brad Vickers, who tells you that something is after the STARS members. Finally, you get to RPD, Nemesis makes his appearance and murders Brad Vickers right in front of you. Even after you run into the police station, you can still hear Nemesis trying to bust down the door behind you. It's fucking terrifying. Now, I could go on and on about the brain-dead level design in RE3 Remake, the lack of memorable encounters, and just the general incompetence of the game, but I think I've made my point, so let's move on. Now we have Resident Evil 8. I refuse to call this game Resident Evil Village, as it insists, because I am so tired of this trend of taking numbers out of the fucking titles. What's wrong with the numbers? I swear to God, if Resident Evil 9 is some stupid-ass name like Resident Evil Resurgence, or Resident Evil Revenge, or Resident Evil Revelations, that one actually exists and is actually pretty good. Like, I got an idea for you. How about you re-enter the fucking numbers in the fucking titles? Okay, let's get back on topic. As with RE7, I don't have gameplay to show, but unlike RE7, there's not much to really say on RE8, other than it's basically a PG-13 Resident Evil. No scares, no tension. They straight up admitted that they made the game less tense in order to appeal to a broader audience. You'd think they would have learned their lesson after 5 and 6, but I guess not. So yeah, not really much to say here, so instead, let's just talk about the most recent Resident Evil game, Resident Evil 4 Remake. Let me just start off by saying that I really like the Resident Evil 4 Remake. I do have some issues with the game, which I've expressed in other videos, but overall, I think the positives outweigh the negatives here. That being said, the tension in this game is not exactly where I'd like it to be. Although I can't really blame RE4 Remake for this, considering the original game was also a huge departure from the slower-paced gameplay that the games were known for. And credit where credit is due. RE4's combat does have that same element of game mechanics building off one another, as the combat is constantly changing and growing more intense as things keep spiraling out of control. In fact, RE4 Remake adds in a new enemy type where a fallen Ganado has the chance of rising up back from the dead faster and stronger than before, similar to the Crimson Heads from RE1. However, unlike RE1, where this would happen over time, RE4 has this happen right in front of you. It's a more immediate type of horror, and I can perfectly understand why someone might enjoy this type of gameplay more than classic Resident Evil design. At the same time, though, this is a remake. Things should be changed, and I don't know if this is just the impression that I got from the marketing, but I was thinking this was going to be a more survival horror-esque take on the original game. And it is in some ways, but overall, this is just RE4 again, but with better combat this time. You know the part where Mendez shows up and starts chasing you? I got really excited because I thought they would have him stalking you around like Tyrant for a little bit, but no, this part lasts for like not even a minute, and then you're into the boss fight. Why not have him chase you around the village the whole time? I mean, we got the castle, which has a lot more backtracking than the original game. Why not have some Garradors roaming around the castle? Wouldn't that lead to some really interesting gameplay moments? I just feel like they could have done a little more based on what we got. So to go back to the initial question of the video, yes, I do believe Resident Evil games are getting less scary with each game. And with the future of the Resident Evil franchise being sort of uncertain right now, I just really hope Capcom doesn't lose their way with the franchise like they have in the past. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.